right, good morning and welcome to another edition of the newspaper review here on Lagoon Radio, your number one online gospel radio station powered by the Diocese of Lagos Anglican Communion. You can like and follow us on all our social media platforms. On Facebook is at Lagoon Radio Nigeria, on Instagram and Twitter is at Lagoonradio.Ng. You can also download our app on Google Play Store and App Store, irrespective of the device that you use. My name is Taiwo Adiola Shabiligbi, and I won't be doing this alone. I have with me in the studio Koinsola Alao. Good morning, Koinsola.
Good morning, Lagos, Nigeria.
And of course, we're having some beautiful faces and voices joining us soon. If you want to put a face to the voices here, you can go to our YouTube channel. It's at LagoonTV. We are live, and now we are live on Facebook as well. Well, in no particular order, we have a Jazeera newspaper, we have Daily Independent, we have a National Economy, we have Nigerian Tribune, we have Leadership, New Telegraph, Business Day, The Daily Times, This Day, Nigerian News Direct, Blueprint Newspaper, This Nigeria. I will try as much as possible to cover these papers. Koinsola, over to you.
Why did you put me on the spot?
Okay. All right, I'll take the Al Jazeera then. All right, boldly written on the front page, we have cracks in APC. And the writer to the story says, Gbajabiamila, Mila, Sanwo-Olu, others make factional caretaker committee list. Akpanu Dode says it's treasonable felony. Group says people derived from being stakeholders. Group says power derived from being stakeholders, Uncertainty as February convention draws near. All this you find on page 8 of the Al Jazeera newspaper. And also defamation, CUPP spokesman, floor speaker, IGP and others in court. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 29. We have an editorial there that says a needless controversy over labeling bandits as terrorists. The story is on the front page. The editorial is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 3 of the paper. Still on the front page, police arrest 8 fleeing inmates after correctional center attack. The story is on page 12. You can continue reading. 74.6% residents in Gombe poor, says UNICEF. Hey, it's quite tiny, but says UNICEF. The story is on page 12 as well. Still in the news, Kaduna begins 4-day working week tomorrow. Page 11 of the paper. Special reports, which says revisiting rail workers strike. The story is on page 31. And lastly on the paper, insecurity, COVID-19 stole Calabar Carnival. This you find on page 13, and that will be all on the paper.
So moving on to the Daily Independent newspaper, Northern elders oppose unconditional release of Nnamdi Kanu. You can read up more on page 29 of the Daily Independent newspaper. Concerning COVID Omicron, federal government uncertain over appropriate control measures to adopt. You can read up more on page 26 as well. Confusion in APC as factional caretaker committee emerges. And the writer under that says Sachs Boni-led committee fixes convention for 26th of February. Names Lawan Gbajabiamila into committee. Their actions is felonious, says Akpadueche. You can read up all of these on page 5 of the Daily Independent newspaper. Over Joyce jailbreak, Nedco's operative attacker, 9 inmates killed, 252 escape. You can read up on page 6. 2 policemen missing, 3 injured in a Boeing community attack, still on page 6. And on page 7, abducted victim escape as NAF jet raids bandits, camps killed, scores. You can find that on page 8. And moving on to the other major headline, 8 more years of APC-led federal government will break up Nigeria, says Ayu. Says Buhari's government's biggest cancer affecting the country. You can read up more on page. This is on page. Can I get the page actually? Page 7 of the Daily Independent newspaper. Electoral Act Amendment, most progressive bill from NAS, says NLC, still on page 7. And on page 29, police FRSC officer shot dead as armed robbers attack bank in Ekiti State. You can read up more of these on page 29 of the Daily Independent papers.
All right, thank you very much. I'll jump over to the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. At the top of the paper, Kaduna begins 4-day working format for civil servant. The story is on page 25. You can read up more on that. State funding police, Fayemi. The story is on page 30. World Bank hails Kogi's 2020 audited financial statement. It's on page 6. You can read up more on that. And the major headline there says COVID-19 Omicron variant. Federal government puts Nigerians on alert. And the writer to the story says Canada detects first cases from 2 travelers from Nigeria. Ayade suspends 2021 Calabar Carnival. World must prepare. Omicron poses high global risk. WHO says. Life, job becoming difficult for the unvaccinated. What to know. All this you can read up on pages 4 and pages 5 of the Nigerian Tribune. 200 residents lament as FHA demolishes houses in Lagos. The story is on page 30. EFCC arrests 60 suspected Yahoo boys in Ogun State. Still on page 30. Factional APC caretaker committee emerges in Abuja and fixes February 26 for convention. And the writer to the story says there are mere attention seekers, says Senator Akpanu Dode. ACN CPC caucuses in APC battle over presidential chairmanship tickets. All this you can read up on page 22 of the Nigerian Tribune. Ondo killing. Our mother was killed by ritualist. Family alleges. The story is on page 27. And at the very bottom of the paper, police kill 2 gunmen who murdered 4 mourners in Benue State. Page 26 of the paper. Gunmen attack Ebonyi lawmaker and 2 policemen missing. Still on page 26, you find the story there. And finally, Evans co-defendant dies in custody. Stories on page 27 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. All right, before we move on, we have Simidele Olabisioke joining us. Good morning, Simidele.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, people. Good morning, great nation. How are you doing today? I'll be taking the national economy and right at the top of the national economy, why Nigeria is not fully benefiting from current oil boom, says World Bank. So if you want to know the why, you can check the page 4 of the national economic papers. And boldly written on it, federal government begins probe as victims lament horror of small-scale lending. That's also on page 4 of the national economy. Then moving to page 5 of the national economy, talking about the Omicron variant. AFDB postpones 2021 Africa Investment Forum. And still on page 5, we've saved over $6 million using port process manual, says Shippers Council. And we have the leader to watch there. That's Mr. Adinka Shoneko, an accomplished professional at CSCS. You can get the full details at the front page of the national economy. That'll be all on the national economy.
All right, thank you very much. Over to you, Koisola.
So moving on to the leadership newspaper, 30 billion duty. We are yet to get directive to ground private jets, says NCCA and NAMA. You can read up on page 7. COVID-19 vaccination mandate for federal workers begins as 3 Nigerian travelers detected with Omicron variant in Canada, Hong Kong. Continue to observe COVID-19 protocols, NCDC tells Nigerians, and we are still looking for answers, says WHO. All of this can be found on page 4 of the leadership newspaper. PNB commissions Vadilinka Obudu Cattle Ranch. You can read up on page 15. Bandits profiling. Not all Fulani are terrorists, Northern Elders says on page 10 of the leadership newspaper. Messi beats Ronaldo to win 7th Ballon d'Or award. You can read up on page 28. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey quits to allow growth. You can read up on page 15. Just prison attack, 9 bodies recovered, 252 inmates escaped and 9 recaptured. All of this can be found on page 7. APC denies zoning chairmanship to North Central. You can read up more on page 8 of the leadership newspaper, and that's it.
All right, moving on to the New Telegraph newspaper. At the very top of the paper, we have subsidy halt talks with World Bank, IMF on reforms, says OPS. Says government not showing sense of accountability. The story is on the front page and you can continue reading on page 4. CBN outmates non-commercial exports form. The story is on page 25. Insecurity, Fayemi insists on state police. Says governor's funding is quite tiny. Okay, so the story is on page 5. Kalu visits IPOB leader in DSS custody. Stories on pages 3 and pages 5 of the New Telegraph newspaper. JAMB adopt cashless registration makes 141 million naira in 1 week. The story is on page 4. World Bank hails Kogi's 2020 audited financial statement, page 27 of the paper, and boldly written on the front page, federal government's political solution. Yoruba leaders groups disagree on Sunday Igboho. The writer to the story says, we will soon meet president for his release, says YCE. The story is on page 3. You can read up more on that. COVID-19, Ozoi law tasked scientific community over new variant, other mutations, yes. As Canada detects first Omicron variant cases in 2 travelers from Nigeria. Omicron emergence reminder COVID-19 not done with us, says WHO. All this you can read up on pages 3 and pages 26 of the New Telegraph newspaper. And at the very bottom of the paper, Twitter has accepted federal government's conditions, says Kiyamo. And the writer to the story says, microblogging site CEO Dorsey resigns. And at the very, very bottom of the paper, it's a study had reviewed that cone snails venom maltreats diabetics. This you can read up more on page 26.
All right, moving on to business day papers. As I love business, I only have 3 headlines here. MTN to give investors a share for every 20 bought. So that's one from MTN, and can be found on page 3 of the business day papers. And Nigeria, okay, let me take this one. On Omicron variant. Omicron variant spells trouble on Nigeria's slow COVID-19 vaccine rollout. So I think the federal government have a lot to do on that, and I think they really need to speed up the rate of COVID-19 vaccine rollout so that everyone can get vaccinated. So this on fintech. Nigerian fintechs walk tight rope after record funding. You can get that also on page 2 of the Business Day papers, and that'll be all on the Business Day papers.
So moving on to the Daily Times newspaper, federal government to decide an hazard allowance for health workers next week, says Ngige on page 2. More crisis in APC as youth. Boni committee disagree over February convention. And the writer under that says youth group sacks Boni-led CPC, inaugurates new caretaker committee. Purported group membership unknown to APC, said Boni-led CPC. And under the news, it says insecurity. Federal government makes frantic efforts to tackle security challenges, says Omoagege on page 4. And under political news, shared your sword. Ngige appeals to Anambra APC wearing members on page 14. Another business news, First Bank moves to explore opportunities in the non-oil exports on page 3 of the Daily Times newspaper. Finally, consider consequences of your actions. Audrey Kalu tells Amino Kano on page 3 of the Daily Times newspaper.
All right, moving on to this day newspaper. At the very top of the paper, we have China pledges 1 billion additional COVID-19 vaccines for Nigeria, other African countries, and the writer to the story says promises $10 billion investment in 3 years. Omicron variant outbreak, WHO bemoans poor alert system, says new pandemic accord needed. Aviation agencies vigilant, awaits federal government's directive. And NCDC apps on vaccination, adherence to protocols. All you can continue reading on page 10 of this day newspaper. COVID-19 Omicron variant yet to be detected in Nigeria, says federal government. And the writer to the story says to issue travel guideline today. The story you can continue reading on page 10. In most bestial, horrific manner, IPOB beheads cannibalises 2 police officers. And the writer to the story says the action is unacceptable, says federal government. And NEF kicks against Kanu's release. Also, World Bank hails Kogi's 2020 audited financial statement. The story is on page 8, and you can read up more on that.
All right, moving on to Nigerian News Direct. Right at the top, still on COVID-19, Ogun tops other states in vaccination. You can get it on page 12 of the Nigerian News Direct. As Sanwo-Olu says, we are determined to completely stamp out rape others. That's actually on page 23 of Nigerian News Direct. As Nigerian News Direct newspaper picks Oyetola as best governor man of the year. I can get that as well on page 3 of the Nigerian News Direct. Congratulations to Governor Oyetola. And boldly written at the front page of the Nigerian News Direct, APC National Convention controversy trails chairmanship slot, and the riders under that says caretaker committee denies zoning chairmanship for North Central, a mere speculation, says DG Al Makura campaign organization, and the chairmanship presidency slot will be zoned to North South respectively, says the party chieftain, as ONU says special attention needed on equity fairness. You can get all of that on page 2 of the Nigerian News Direct. I'm moving to the bottom of the Nigerian News Direct. Amechi says transportation key for realizing AFCFTA objectives. I can get out on the inside of the Nigerian News Direct. KDSG to begin 4-day working week from December 1 as CBN introduces e-form for non-commercial exports, charges 5,000 naira. That can be seen on page 15 of the Nigerian News Direct. And lastly, on the Nigerian News Direct, businesswoman excretes 80 pellets of cocaine at Abuja airport. You can see that on the inside of the Nigerian News Direct, and I wonder how people still stocking cocaine in their body system and without thinking of the adverse effect. God help us.
Amen. Moving on to the Blueprint newspaper, First Bank creates awareness on export solution. You can find out on page 23. Ignore Igbo leaders, elders request for Nnamdi Kanu's release. NEF tells Buhari. Cautions on labeling all Fulani terrorists and says fuel price increase will worsen economic woes. You can find out more and read up on page 6. Twitter surrenders and agrees to federal government terms on page 5 of the Blueprint newspaper. RMRDC working to save Nigeria over $200 million US from starch importation on page 18. Factional APC caretaker committee imposters Agbanu Diche says they are sponsored by opposition. Fifth colonist says don't derail Boni-led committee. Saliu Mustafa warns. Buhari APC governors can fix convention date. Sheriff says splinter group fixes convention for 26th of February. Party denies zoning chairmanship to North Central on page 6 of the Blueprint newspaper. Jaws jailbreak attacker prison official. 9 inmates shot dead on page 15. Woman to court, daughter belongs to my lover, not pastor's husband. You can read up more of this on page 5. Bandits demand 3 bikes to release 3 Zaria local government staffers on page 7. NDIC pays 108 billion naira liquidation dividends to depositors on page 12. And finally, concerning COVID-19 Omicron, Africa films as European Union and US, others impose travel ban on page 8 of the Blueprint newspaper.
All right, moving on to this day newspaper, which happens to be our last paper for today. No trace of Omicron in Nigeria, says NCDC. Canada detects variants in Nigerian travelers. The story you can find on page 5. Still on the paper, ruling party crisis rumble in APC. Group sacks Buni-led EXCO announces new caretaker committee. We will not be distracted by paid and misguided elements, says Akpanu Duede. The story is on page 4. Adegboruwa fault Kiamo insists NSAS panel legal. The story is on page 7. Cattle rustlers suspected in just jailbreak. The story is on page 10. And that will be all on the newspaper review. I guess we're able to cover all the papers this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for being a part of the show. It's been a wonderful time. This comes up every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. in
West
the morning. Yes, West African time. Don't forget, in the meantime, you can like and follow us on all our social media platforms. On Facebook, it's at Lagoon Radio Nigeria. On Instagram and Twitter, is at Lagoonradio.Ng. You can also tell your family and friends to listen on our website on www.lagoonradio.ng. You can also download the Lagoon Radio app on Google Play Store and App Store, irrespective of the device that you use. My name is Taiwo Adiola Shabiolibe, and thanks to Koinsola Alawu, and of course, Ajayi Olabisi Semidele. Okay. Wait.
Like seriously.
Wait. I don't even know. Ajayi Olabisi Semidele. Okay. Olabisi Semidele. Ajayi. Okay. No. Okay, Ni Ajayi.
Whatever.
You get the message. Okay, so these are the
You don't
beautiful
get it,
faces
forget
behind
about
the,
it.
you know. If you can see us, we say hello. If you can't, we say we love you still. Yeah, come right after now is the land and land show.
Property.
Yes, if you want to buy land, listen to this show. Yeah, okay, so this is where we call it a day. Do not go nowhere. Keep listening to Lagoon Radio. Bye.
Bye.